Exodus chapter 34, verse 1. The Lord said to Moses, "Chisel out 2 stone tablets like the first ones, and I will write on them the words that were on the first tablets, which you broke. Be ready in the morning, and then come up on Mount Sinai. Present yourself to me there on the top of the mountain. No one is to come with you or be seen anywhere on the mountains. Not even the flocks and herds may graze in front of the mountains." So Moses chiseled out 2 stone tablets like the first ones and went up Mount Sinai early in the morning as the Lord had commanded him, and he carried the 2 stone tablets in his hands. So that couldn't have been real big if he carried them in his hands. Then the Lord came down in the cloud and stood there with him and proclaimed his name, the Lord. And he passed in front of Moses, proclaiming, the Lord, the compassionate and gracious God, slow to anger, abounding in love and faithfulness." And that verse, Exodus 34, verse 6, is the most quoted verse in the rest of the Bible. The prophets referred to it, the writers, authors of the New Testament referred to it. So it's the most quoted verse in the Bible, Exodus 34, verse 6. So today we're going to look at the second descriptive term that God used to describe himself. So he described himself as the Lord, the compassionate. And that's what we looked at last week. We looked at compassionate, the descriptive term. Today we're going to look at gracious God, the compassionate and gracious God. So what does it mean when someone is gracious?
My particular version says merciful.
And mine does too. But I chose to use the translation of the masses, New International Version. But mine does too. It says mercy. So what does it mean? I've heard the term used a lot all my life. People say, "Good gracious."
I think it's different.
Good gracious son, you were.
When someone is gracious, what does that mean?
They get what we don't necessarily deserve.
We are receiving something we don't deserve. When someone is when someone is a gracious host, what kind of host are they?
Happy to serve, enjoying serving.
Can you hear the duck outside?
Is that the same duck that lit on the roof that Sunday morning? Quacked us. Anyway, what did you say, Paul? I'm sorry. I apologize for the duck.
I think it's somebody that enjoys serving. If they're a gracious host, they're happy to be doing it for you.
They enjoy doing something for people. They're gracious, and they receive grace from that host. So how else do we use the term?
They are respectful, and they see value in the person that they are interacting.
They care very much about other people. Very good. The Bible uses the term in different ways. Proverbs 1:18 says, "My child, listen when your father corrects you, and don't neglect your mother's instruction. When you learn from them, or what you learn from them, will crown you with grace and be a chain of honor around your neck." What does that mean? Crown you with grace.
Gives you a learning heart.
It'll be a great benefit to you. Yeah. Proverbs 22 verse 11 says, "Whoever loves a pure heart and gracious speech will have the king as a friend." So there's something about grace and being gracious that is very beneficial to the recipient. Proverbs 31 verse 30 says, "Charm is deceptive and beauty does not last, but a woman who fears the Lord will be greatly praised." And that word that is translated greatly praised is the same word that's translated grace in other places. It can also be used, grace can be used as a descriptive term, as Cheryl mentioned, referring to generous favor. When you receive something you don't necessarily deserve. There is an interesting place that's used. We find this word, Genesis 42:21. Says, speaking among themselves, this is talking about a conversation that Joseph's brothers were having when they came face to face with Joseph in Potiphar's house. They're talking among themselves. And they say in Genesis 42:21, speaking among themselves, they said, "Clearly we are being punished because of what we did to Joseph long ago. We saw his anguish when he pleaded for his life, but we wouldn't listen. That's why we're in trouble." But when it says when he pleaded for his life, that's the same term that's translated gracious in other places. Joseph, when he was in that pit and his brothers were up there, Joseph was begging for grace. It is what that means. Another place that it's used is the interaction between Mordecai and Esther. In the book of Esther 4:8, Mordecai gives Hathach a copy of the decree issued in Susa that called for the death of all the Jews. He asked Hathach to show it to Esther and explain the situation to her. He also asked Hathach to direct her to go to the king to beg for mercy. That's the same word, grace. So that the Jewish people wouldn't be annihilated. It says, beg for mercy and plead for her people. Another place that it's used is Ruth 2 verse 10. Ruth fell at his feet and thanked him warmly. This is Ruth to Boaz. What have I done to deserve such kindness? And that's the same word, grace. She asked, I'm only a foreigner. So, what happens in the Bible when people plead for God's grace? How does God respond?
Always with mercy.
Pardon?
With mercy.
Yes.
Favor.
Full of mercy and grace. Keith alluded to it in his opening remarks. When the people of Israel were in captivity, they begged and they pleaded for grace, the grace of God. So, did God hear them? Absolutely, He heard them. He not only heard them, but He responded. The psalmist talks about this in Psalm 4, verse 1. The psalmist says, answer me when I call to you, O God, who declares me innocent. For the Lord is a faithful God, and blessed are those who wait for His help. He shows a consistent pattern of responding to people when they call out to Him or cry out to Him. What's another way that God responds? Well, He responded to the captives by rescuing them, redeeming them. What's another way that God has responded even to us?
He intervenes in life.
Pardon?
He intervenes in our lives even when we're not asking for it, when we're not seeking it. It's very clear that he has his own agenda and purpose in the Spirit to direct, guide, intervene, throw obstacles in our path or open doors.
He sent Jesus.
Not only does God move in our lives in providence, with what we would call it, and we use providence as a general term to describe what we can't explain, but it's the Holy Spirit moving in our life and speaking to us and intervening. One of the songs, the poster that they were printing said, "Keep on praying, calling on God, asking for that grace and that mercy." And then one of the most powerful ways that God has responded to us is by sending Jesus. John chapter 1 verses 14 through 17 that we read today. "So the Word became human and made his home among us. He was full of unfailing love and faithfulness. And we have seen his glory, the glory of the Father's one and only Son." John testified about him when he shouted to the crowds, "This is the one I was talking about when I said, 'Someone is coming after me who is far greater than I am, for he existed long before me.' From his abundance we have all received one gracious blessing after another." And there's our word, grace. "For the law was given through Moses, but grace and truth came through Jesus Christ." So how does Jesus fully embody the grace of God?
He doesn't judge and he doesn't blame. Things which apparently many of us are very good at.
I was just sitting here thinking the same thing. God's grace is about love, not judgment.
We live in a society today that graciousness is almost extinct. In the political realm, within the Christian church, within looking upon people in other parts of the world of different skin color, and that this is calling for a response that's different, perhaps at times measured, but I think we're in a world that the lovely outward interactions without, to the opposite.
I don't know why we respond so negatively to the grace of God in our lives, to become so judgmental and so angry and the way we do. But there's actually two responses to Jesus that the Bible mentions that we all need to have. And one is found in Ephesians 2 verse 8. It says, "God saved you by his grace when you believed." So what is our response to Jesus and this grace of God?
Gratitude.
We believe. God saved you by his grace when you believe, and you can't take credit for it. It is the gift of God, undeserved, as Cheryl said earlier. Salvation is not a reward for the good things we've done, so none of us can boast about it. So one response to Jesus is that we believe in him, we accept this beautiful grace of God. And what would be another response? When someone has blessed us beyond imagination with something that we don't deserve.
To extend that to others.
To pass it forward. To extend that same, what we've received, to pass it on. And here's a beautiful example of that happened to me just this morning. You remember just before Christmas, we invited the gentleman in that makes our coffee and sets everything up. I cannot remember his name.
Richard.
Richard. And we blessed him with a Christmas gift. I'm not really sure.
$200.
What was it?
$200.
$200 we blessed him with. Well, he stopped me this morning. And here it is. This is February the 9th. So we're talking a good 60 days later, almost. He stops me and he says, I want you to know that money that y'all gave me that day made my Christmas. It just blessed me beyond imagination. I just want to thank you again and that was just hardly any skin off our back, and we don't understand.
But do you know what he did with it? He blessed others.
He gave it away. Yes, that's what he did with it. He blessed others with what we blessed him with. And that is being gracious. That is grace. Here's what Peter said in 1 Peter 5:4-7. And when the great shepherd appears, you will receive a crown of never-ending glory and honor in the same way. You who are younger must accept the authority of the elders, and all of you dress yourselves in humility as you relate to one another, for God opposes the proud but gives grace to the humble. So, humble yourselves under the mighty power of God, and at the right time he will lift you up in honor. Give all your worries and cares to God, for he cares about you. So our response is not just to believe and to pass it on and bless others, but it is simply humble ourselves before God and to accept this wonderful gift of grace that he's given to us.
An amazing way of experiencing and learning the grace, which a lot of folks have done, is working with others that are so far down the food chain and have such great needs in their lives, and then find out that they have more grace for you in life, in their lives, than you do.
Mm.
And, Patty off at First Monday, or all the different folks that come in, us people in our own lives, if they cross our path and we have an opportunity of interacting, we suddenly discover that there's some things there within them that, I'm going to say 40 odd years of that type of interaction has humbled me, coming back at just how these people react to each other and react to us. It's so much better than my Americanized version of whatever that means.
Yep. So may we in humility believe in the greatest gift of all, Jesus, and humbly accept Jesus, and then pass this grace we've received off to others. We have a short video to summarize and wrap this up.
You try to describe what God is like. It could be difficult or daunting. But when the people who wrote the Bible pondered the mystery of God, they consistently describe God's character in this way: compassionate and gracious, slow to anger, overflowing with loyal love and faithfulness. We're going to look at the second key word in the statement, gracious. The Hebrew word is chanun, which is related to the Hebrew noun chen. This word chen is often translated as grace or favor, and if you study how this word is used throughout the Bible, you find a fascinating story. One meaning of chen is delightful or favorable. In the Psalms, a skilled poet is said to have lips of chen. That is, he can craft beautiful words that bring delight. Or a dazzling piece of jewelry is an ornament of chen. It attracts attention and favor. This is why chen is often the word used to describe a gift given with delight or favor. In these cases, chen could be translated as grace. Like in the story of Esther, who approaches the king of Persia to ask that she and her people be spared from death. She calls this a request for chen. And because the king delights in Esther, he favors her and grants her wish. So, giving a gift of favor is chen because it's motivated by delight. And the most extreme kind of chen is showing favor to someone who should get what they deserve, not a generous gift. Like Jacob, who cheated his brother Esau, ran away, and then after 20 years wants to come back and make things right. So he comes to Esau asking, "May I find chen in your eyes?" Jacob isn't asking for what is fair, but for favor. And surprisingly, that's what Esau gives him. He chooses to delight in his brother Jacob and show him grace that he doesn't deserve. Now, chen requires a generous spirit, which people sometimes have. But in the Bible, the one who shows more chen than anyone else is God. Like when God rescued the Israelites out of slavery in Egypt, and they quickly betrayed him by giving their allegiance to a golden idol as their God. But then, Moses steps in and asks God to consider giving a gift that they don't deserve. And God says, yes, by showing the ultimate act of chen, forgiveness and a promise to be with his people. This character trait of God is so reliable that over 40 times in the book of Psalms, people cry out for God's chen when they're sick or in danger or when the Israelites are in exile. And the biblical prophets like Isaiah look back to God's chen in the past and boldly declare that God will one day show chen to his people by delivering them and all creation from death and ruin. Now, when we turn to the authors of the New Testament, they describe God's chen with the Greek word charis, which means gracious gift. Like when we're introduced to Jesus in the Gospel of John, we're told that Jesus is God's glorious charis become human, sent into a world of people trapped in darkness and death. Because according to the Apostle Paul, we're like the living dead. God has handed humanity over to the destructive consequences of our selfish decisions. But, Paul says, God is rich in mercy, and by his charis, he's rescued us. He's talking about how Jesus' life, death, and resurrection are offered to us as a generous gift of life that is more powerful than death. And as with any gift, all one has to do is receive it. So, now you can see why the biblical authors talk so much about this description of God's character throughout the Bible. When people are willing to own their failures and ask God for chen, he has a consistent and generous response. God gives the gift of himself, his life, and his love. And this is what it means that God is gracious.